He wasn't supposed to answer the phone. It was 2 a.m., a wrong number, a stranger's trembling voice on the other end. But he listened, and by sunrise, everything he thought he knew about love loss and second chances would quietly unravel under the roof of a forgotten house, and beside a woman who never meant to be found. Before we begin, if you believe in the quiet power of kindness and stories that heal the heart, consider subscribing. We share true-to-life tales that just might stay with you long after the final word. Now let's begin. The phone rang at 2 a.m. Graham Cole stirred on the worn leather couch in his small living room. Blinking against the soft glow of a nightlight, Ellie insisted on keeping in the hallway. It took a few seconds for the ringtone to register. Who the hell would call him at this hour? He picked up the phone, half expecting a robocall or a misdial. But there was a pause, then a voice. A woman's voice. "Is this Dr. Marston?" she asked, her tone brittle, trembling like something was breaking behind it. "No," Graham said, sitting up straighter. "You've got the wrong number." There was a sharp breath on the other end, then silence. But she didn't hang up. I'm sorry. I must have pressed the wrong contact," the woman whispered. "I didn't mean please, I didn't mean to bother anyone." She was crying, not loudly, but the kind of quiet unraveling that said she'd been holding it in for too long. Graham looked at the phone screen. No name, just a number. Local area code. His thumb hovered over the red button, but something about her voice stopped him cold. It wasn't just sadness. It was something closer to desperation, a kind of aloneness he'd known before. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and steady. There was another pause, then so soft he almost missed it. "My mom's gone. I didn't know who else to call. I thought maybe—" "I don't know what I thought." She sniffled and the line crackled like she was pacing or moving. "Then I'm sorry. Please forget this. I don't want to ruin your night." The call ended. Graham stared at the screen, heart thudding quietly. Most people would have gone back to sleep. But Graham Cole had made that mistake once. 6 years ago, he got a call from his younger brother, Kyle, at 11:43 p.m. He was exhausted from a double shift and ignored it, thinking he'd return the call in the morning. By dawn, Kyle had died in a rollover crash on a frozen road outside Montana City. Ever since, Graham had lived with the gnawing truth, sometimes the person calling doesn't have time to try again. His phone buzzed again. It was a FaceTime call, likely accidental. But this time, the screen lit up briefly with a dark, blurred image. Then it cut off. A name flashed briefly in the corner of the call log, Willow Hill Estate. He knew the place, not personally, but everyone in the county had heard of the old Whitmore property hidden up on the Ridge Road miles past the edge of town. Most said the house was empty now, abandoned, haunted by money and memory. He looked over at Ellie, fast asleep in her room. The door cracked open just wide enough for light to pass through. His eyes flicked to the keys hanging on the hook near the door. This was probably foolish. But what if it wasn't? 20 minutes later, Ellie was buckled into the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket, and clutching her worn, stuffed dog. She didn't ask questions. She was used to her dad doing things others might not understand. "Where are we going?" she mumbled, yawning. "Just checking on someone," Graham said, his voice soft. "Won't be long." The road up to Willow Hill was barely visible in the fog, thick like wet wool. The trees leaned in close on either side, tall and watchful. Graham drove carefully, feeling the old truck vibrate on the gravel headlights, barely cutting through the night. When they crested the ridge, the estate came into view. Faded iron gates stood open, the long driveway slick with leaves. The house loomed ahead, 3 stories of shadowed windows wrapped in ivy and thyme. Graham parked and killed the engine. "You can stay here," he said gently to Ellie. "I'll only be a minute." Ellie nodded sleepily, curling into her blanket, as Graham climbed out and made his way up the steps. The door was ajar. He knocked lightly, then pushed it open. Inside the house was still. Dust hung in the air like suspended breath. Old photographs lined the hallway, black and white, gold-framed memories of people who once mattered. And there, sitting on the floor in the far corner of the parlor, was a woman in a pale blue robe. She looked up as he entered, startled, but not surprised. Her eyes were red, her face pale and beautiful in the fragile way porcelain is beautiful, easily shattered. Her hair was unbrushed, tumbling down over one shoulder. She looked like someone who had been crying for hours, but had no more tears left. "I thought I hung up," she said quietly. "You did," Graham replied. "But I figured someone who calls a stranger at 2 a.m. might need something more than silence." She stared at him for a long moment. "I'm not crazy," she said. "I didn't say you were. I didn't expect you to come. I didn't expect to either." A silence passed between them. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but full of something unspoken. A shared understanding that neither of them knew what this moment was, only that it mattered. "Who are you?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Graham." "I fix things," he said simply. "Air conditioners, furnaces, sometimes other things too." A faint smile ghosted across her lips, then disappeared. "My name is Annabelle," she said. Then, after a pause, "My mom died 3 nights ago in that room upstairs. I've been alone since. I tried to call her doctor. I must have pressed the wrong contact." Graham nodded. "Maybe," he said. Or maybe it was the right one. The kitchen smelled like dust and lemon oil. Graham stood by the doorway, unsure if stepping farther in would cross a line neither of them could define. The silence in the house was thick, too thick, for a place that had once held life. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded muted, as if time itself had learned to tread lightly here. Annabelle hadn't moved since she introduced herself. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, the fabric of her robe bunched, and wrinkled the hem stained from the hardwood floor. She didn't look at Graham directly, but her voice broke the hush. "I haven't been able to go upstairs since they took her away." Graham said nothing at first. Some grief needed space before it needed answers. He stepped forward, slowly crouching down, but keeping enough distance to offer respect. "I'm sorry," he said. She gave a faint nod, like the words barely registered. Her gaze drifted to the fireplace, unused cold. "This house hasn't felt like home in years," she murmured. "And now it just feels like a mausoleum." Graham looked around. The furniture was elegant, but worn, wrapped in sheets in some places, as if the house was halfway between mourning and forgetting. On the mantel sat a crystal vase with wilted lilies, perhaps the last thing her mother touched. "Do you live here alone?" he asked gently. Annabelle finally looked at him, eyes rimmed in the pale pink of exhaustion. "I moved back 2 months ago when her health started to fail. I thought we had more time." She looked down, ashamed, as if expecting judgment for having misjudged something no one could predict. "I was trying to fix things between us," she added. "But it never really happened." Graham nodded slowly, not as someone who understood everything, but as someone who understood enough. "Sometimes," he said, "the people we love the most are the ones we run out of time with." Her lips trembled at that. She looked away, blinking hard. "I didn't mean to drag you into this. I really thought I was calling her doctor." "You didn't drag me," Graham said. "I came on my own." That silenced her again. Her fingers toyed with the cuff of her robe, twisting the fabric like it was holding her together. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," she admitted, as if it were a confession. Graham stood and offered his hand. "Let's change that." She hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand, like it might burn her. But then, slowly, she placed her fingers in his. Her skin was cold, almost fragile, but her grip surprised him with its steadiness. The kitchen was enormous, wide windows, deep cabinets, brass fixtures dulled by time. It had the bones of warmth, but none of the memory. Graham rummaged through the pantry and fridge, finding enough for a simple meal. Ellie, now awake, wandered in, rubbing her eyes. She took one look at Annabelle and gave a sleepy smile before curling up on the built-in bench by the window. "Hi," she said softly. Annabelle blinked at the little girl, unsure what to say. "This is Ellie Graham," said. "My daughter. She's my boss most days." Annabelle managed a breath of a laugh, thin but real. "Nice to meet you, Ellie." The girl nodded as if they'd known each other forever and began tracing imaginary shapes on the frosted window pane. While Graham cooked, Annabelle sat quietly at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. The heat brought a bit of color back to her cheeks. "You're a long way from home," she said finally. "We live about 70 miles out," Graham replied. "Closer to the river bend. Small place. Honest work. You always answer strange calls in the middle of the night." "No, but I've learned not to ignore them either." Annabelle's eyes narrowed, slightly curious. "Why?" Graham stirred the scrambled eggs. "Because once someone I loved called and I didn't answer." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The food was simple eggs, toast, reheated soup. But Annabelle ate like it was the first real meal in days. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but Graham pretended not to notice. Ellie kept talking about her favorite animal shows, her voice filling the space with innocent normalcy. Annabelle listened in silence. Sometimes she even smiled. After breakfast, Graham stood to clear the plates. "You should sleep," he told her. "You look like you haven't in days." Annabelle opened her mouth to protest, but then thought better of it. "You're probably right." She paused, standing slowly. "There are guest rooms down the hall. You and Ellie are welcome to stay the night." "Thank you," he said, genuinely surprised. "I figure you came all this way. And besides, I don't think I want to be alone just yet." She looked away as she said it, but Graham caught the meaning in her voice. It wasn't a request for help. It was an invitation to stay for a moment longer, for the silence to be shared. Later that morning, as the fog lifted from the ridge and pale sunlight crept through the trees, Graham sat in a quiet room near the foyer, watching Ellie doze on a velvet settee. He glanced toward the hallway, where Annabelle had gone to rest. The house, for the first time, felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place still waiting for life to return. He didn't know what would come next, but for now, he was exactly where he needed to be. The house woke slowly, like an old woman opening her eyes after a long illness. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains in ribbons of gold, cutting across the hardwood floors and revealing a world suspended in dust. Outside, the trees of Willow Hill whispered in the wind, their limbs brushing against windows like fingertips tapping out forgotten songs. Graham stirred first, stretching out the stiffness from a night spent in a wingback chair near the foyer. His eyes went immediately to Ellie, curled on a settee under a borrowed quilt, her chest rising and falling in the rhythm only children seem to master, unbothered, trusting the world to hold them. He stood quietly, stretching his arms above his head. For a brief moment, it almost felt like a normal morning. Then he remembered where they were and why. He followed the scent of weak coffee into the kitchen, where Annabelle stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a mug that looked far too large for her frame. She wore a gray cardigan over yesterday's clothes, her hair gathered in a low, uneven knot. Her posture was straighter now, but her eyes hadn't lost their guarded fog. "I found filters," she said without turning around. "And miraculously the coffee isn't expired." "That's already a small miracle," Graham replied. She smiled faintly and glanced at him. "Your daughter talks in her sleep." "I know," he said. She once tried to discipline her stuffed animals mid-dream. Annabelle didn't laugh exactly, but the corner of her mouth twitched in a way that said, maybe her heart was still capable of remembering how. There was silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The house had been full of emptiness for too long, and now it was learning to breathe again. Annabelle broke the stillness. "I should show you something." She led him down the hallway past the parlor and into the deeper, darker veins of the house. The temperature dropped the farther they walked. The air turned still, as if the house held its breath here. They stopped in front of a closed door, heavy oak, with a brass knob dulled to green. "This was my mother's bedroom," she said quietly. "They took her from here 3 nights ago. I haven't gone back since." Graham said nothing. He knew the sacred silence that surrounded grief's epicenter. Annabelle turned the knob with hesitation, then pushed the door open. The room was a time capsule. The floral wallpaper had faded, but the scent of lavender and old books still lingered in the air. The bed was neatly made, though the pillow bore the ghost of a head that had once rested there. On the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a half-drunk glass of water, untouched since the night she died. Annabelle stepped in, but stayed near the threshold, like she feared stepping too far might shatter something. "She used to sit by that window every afternoon," she said, pointing. "Read old poetry. Sometimes just stared at the trees." Graham crossed the room slowly, stopping beside the vanity, where a framed photo of a much younger Annabelle sat. A girl of maybe 10 freckles and curls, smiling up at the woman beside her. They looked nothing alike, but the bond was unmistakable. "She looks like she loved you very much," he said. Annabelle shook her head slowly. "She did, in her own way. But we didn't talk much at the end. There were things I wanted to say." He looked back at her. "Then say them now." Annabelle frowned. "To who the walls?" "To her," he said, his voice steady. "Even if it's just to yourself. Grief doesn't care if anyone's listening, it just wants you out." She sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I told her I'd come home. I told her I'd take care of her. But I waited too long. I was too proud. Or afraid. Or maybe both." "You're here now," Graham said softly. "But it doesn't change what's gone." "No," he agreed. "But it changes what's next." The words hovered between them. Later that morning, while Annabelle gathered laundry she hadn't touched in weeks, Graham explored the rest of the house with Ellie at his side. "Why's everything covered?" she asked, tugging at a white sheet over a dusty armchair. "To keep the memories from floating away," Graham said without thinking. She looked at him with the kind of clarity only children have. "But wouldn't it be better to let them fly around again?" He smiled. "You might be right." They pulled sheets from furniture, revealing dark wood velvet cushions and forgotten frames. The grand piano in the sitting room was out of tune, but its surface gleamed beneath a layer of dust. On the wall above it hung a faded oil painting of a willow tree, tall and bowed, as if whispering secrets to the earth. "Is that the willow?" Ellie asked, pointing. "Could be," Graham said. "Maybe you should ask Miss Annabelle." In the afternoon, Ellie found an old broom and started sweeping the porch, her small arms moving with determination. Annabelle stood at the door and watched, arms crossed, unsure whether to intervene or let it happen. "She doesn't stop, does she?" Annabelle asked. "Nope," Graham said. "Gets it from her mom." Annabelle hesitated. "Where is her mom?" Graham's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. She passed. "Cancer." Ellie was 3. Annabelle looked away. "I'm sorry. She doesn't remember much, which is its own kind of mercy." He didn't elaborate, neither did she. As the day waned, Graham repaired a flickering porch light and replaced a few warped boards near the steps. The house creaked less now. It felt less like a mausoleum and more like a resting place waking from hibernation. Inside, Annabelle stood in the doorway of her mother's room again, This time, she didn't cry. She reached out and pulled the curtains open. It began with a sound, soft, low, and slightly warped, as though the house itself was remembering something it hadn't dared to speak aloud in years. Graham was in the back corridor repairing a fuse that controlled the sunroom's lights when he heard it. He paused mid-motion, brow furrowed. It wasn't the hum of old plumbing or the creak of settling beams. It was music. Faint. Fragile. He followed the sound through the winding hallway, past shuttered windows and narrow doors, until he reached the old parlor near the south wing, one of the few rooms untouched since they arrived. The door was half open. Ellie stood in the middle of the room, hands clasped behind her back, eyes wide with wonder. In the corner sat a vintage phonograph, one of those classic Victrola machines, with a brass horn and lacquered mahogany bass, the kind you might find in a black and white film spinning tales and dust in equal measure. It was turning. The needle rested on a vinyl record that crackled with age, the music soft and laced with ghost notes. It was a lullaby, familiar yet distant, like something remembered from another lifetime. "What is that?" Ellie whispered, without looking away. "I'm not sure," Graham said, stepping in. "Where did you find it?" Ellie pointed to a wooden cabinet, its doors now slightly ajar. Inside, Graham saw a small box of records, and tucked beside them, a cloth pouch marked Whitmore and Cumberland Custom Recordings, 1962. Before he could investigate further, Annabelle appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "I didn't even know that still worked," she said, her voice barely louder than the music. "It belonged to my grandfather." She crossed the room, slowly kneeling beside the phonograph as the record reached its end, with a soft click, click, click. Her fingers hovered over the arm as if afraid to touch something that might break her. "I thought my mother had stored all these away. I never knew she kept any of them here." Graham reached into the pouch and pulled out a labeled vinyl. "To Annabelle, in case you need my voice." "Love, Mom." Time seemed to freeze. Annabelle stared at the label, lips parted, but silent. Her eyes filled so quickly with tears, she didn't seem to realize they had fallen. "Play it," she whispered. Graham placed the record on the turntable, adjusted the needle, and stepped back. The static buzzed, and then her voice came alive. "Annabelle, if you're listening to this, I'm probably gone. Or close enough. I made this recording one afternoon when you were out walking by the orchard. I couldn't find the words when you were near me, but maybe I can say them now." Annabelle dropped into the nearest chair, her shoulders caving inward. "I know we didn't say everything. I know we both held things too tightly for too long. But I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. Not even in the hardest years. Not even when we couldn't speak." The voice cracked a long exhale, breaking through the recording. "I was proud of you. Not for what you did, just for who you are. The world made you strong, and I didn't always know how to hold that without breaking myself. I hope you find someone who sees that strength and doesn't flinch from it." The message paused, then concluded with something so small it almost passed unnoticed. "If someone is with you now, if this house isn't empty, then maybe that miracle already happened." The record crackled to a stop. No one moved. Graham stood rooted to the floor, his throat tight. Ellie reached for Annabelle's hand without a word. Annabelle didn't speak. She just sat there, head bowed, face wet, as if her soul had heard something it had needed for years: permission. Permission to grieve, to let go, to begin again. Later that afternoon, the parlor remained open. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, catching dust motes as they danced to silent music. Annabelle re-entered the room with a small box in her arms. Inside were photos, letters, and old tokens, things she had once tucked away because they were too painful. Now she laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces she was ready to face. This was our family, She said half to Graham, half to herself. Before the money made it complicated, before grief made us distant. Graham sat across from her, not as a fixer this time, but as someone simply willing to sit in the mess. "Do you think you'll stay?" he asked. She looked up. "In the house?" He nodded. She shrugged. "I don't know, but for the first time in a long while, I don't feel like I have to run." Their eyes met, not with heat or urgency, but with something quieter recognition. Two people not looking to be saved, just seen. That night, Annabelle set the table for 3. She found linen napkins her mother had folded in her meticulous way, polished the silver with a soft rag, and lit a single candle in the center. It wasn't a grand meal, leftover soup. Fresh bread Graham had picked up in town, but it felt like ceremony. Ellie chattered about squirrels she saw on the front steps and asked if she could stay just one more night. Annabelle didn't say no. When Graham offered to help clean up, she waved him off with a smile. "I think I want to finish this one myself." He let her. Sometimes healing looked like someone washing their own dishes. As they prepared for bed, Ellie turned to her dad. "Is Miss Annabelle still sad?" Graham looked down at her and pulled the blanket up under her chin. "She's sad," he said, "but not alone anymore." The next morning arrived on the tail end of a rainstorm. The skies were gray, but the air smelled like earth and pine, and somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove cooed like a whispered memory. Annabelle stood on the front porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her cardigan pulled close as she looked out over the mist-covered trees of Willow Hill. The world around her was slowly waking, but inside she still felt unsure if she belonged in it. The past 2 days had unfolded like a strange dream, one in which a single mistake, a misdialed number, had brought 2 strangers into her life. One of them was a little girl who treated her home like a playground full of secrets, and the other, a man who fixed broken things without needing to be asked. And somehow, she hadn't wanted them to leave. Yet. Behind her, the house had come alive in quiet ways. Dishes were cleaned, curtains, drawn windows, opened to let in the scent of rain. A quiet vitality pulsed through its bones, now like the heartbeat of something trying to heal. But healing Annabelle knew too well wasn't always linear. When Graham returned from a quick trip to town for supplies, he found Annabelle in the study sorting through a stack of old paperwork. She didn't look up when he entered. "You okay?" he asked gently. Her tone was clipped. "I'm fine." He paused. "Can I help?" She shook her head. "I've got it." Graham stood for a moment, unsure if he should stay or give her space. Then he noticed a letter on top of the pile, official-looking with the seal of Whitmore and Pratt, her family's law firm. Annabelle caught his glance. "It's nothing," she said quickly, folding the envelope and sliding it beneath the others. "Just estate stuff." But Graham had seen the slight tremble in her hands, the stiffness in her jaw. She stood her smile polite but paper-thin. "I think I need some air. Want company?" She hesitated. Not this time. He let her go. Annabelle walked alone down the gravel path toward the orchard behind the house, where the trees were still bare, their limbs stretching like fingers into the gray sky. She needed the distance, not just from Graham and Ellie, but from herself. That letter had confirmed what she already suspected: the estate was under review. Trustees, distant cousins, family lawyers, and board members had begun circling. They weren't mourning her mother. They were strategizing. There were meetings coming, decisions to be made. And all of it was pressing her to become someone she had run away from for over a decade, Annabelle Whitmore Heiress. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a stone. She sat down on a bench overlooking the northern slope. Her fingers curled around the edge of the wood knuckles white. She had come back here to say goodbye to her mother, maybe even to the house itself. She hadn't planned on staying. But now, there was Ellie's laughter in the halls, the smell of coffee in the kitchen, Graham fixing small things she hadn't even known were broken. And that terrified her, because what if they stayed? And what if they left? Graham found her hours later back on the porch, her hair damp from mist, and her expression unreadable. "You disappeared on me," he said lightly, handing her a steaming mug of tea. "I needed to think." "Did it help?" She gave a non-committal shrug. Graham leaned on the railing beside her, sipping from his own mug. "You know I don't need to know everything. But if you want to talk, I'm here." She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at him, "They want to split the estate. Sell parts of it. Some of the board members think it's too much for me to manage. And maybe they're right. You don't believe that." "I don't know what I believe," she admitted. "This place, it's heavy, Graham. History, expectation, guilt. I thought I'd come back, tie up loose ends, and leave. Simple. But nothing feels simple anymore." He nodded quietly, absorbing her words. "I'm not someone who does well with unfinished things," she said. "And this place, it's nothing but unfinished." Graham chuckled softly. "You just described my entire life." Annabelle cracked a smile despite herself. "Is that what being a single dad is like?" "It's what being human is like," he replied. "We're all just trying to fix what we didn't break, or live with what we can't." She turned to look at him. Really look. His face was weathered, not from age, but from enduring. There was kindness in his eyes, steady, unflinching, a quiet sort of strength that didn't demand to be seen, only offered when needed. "I don't want to need anyone," she confessed. He met her gaze. "That's not the same as not wanting someone beside you." Their eyes held. And just like that, the walls she'd spent years constructing, the ones grief had built, pride had reinforced, and fear had decorated, felt a little less permanent. That evening, as rain returned in gentle sheets, Graham and Ellie prepared grilled cheese and tomato soup, while Annabelle sat in the parlor, listening once more to her mother's recorded voice. But this time, she didn't cry. She smiled. Not wide, not bright, but enough. After dinner, Ellie pulled out a deck of playing cards and announced she was teaching Miss Annabelle to play war. Annabelle obliged, letting herself laugh when Ellie won 5 rounds in a row and dramatically declared herself Queen of Willow Hill. Graham sat nearby, watching the two of them, a quiet contentment in his chest. He hadn't planned to stay, but as the storm beat softly against the windows and laughter echoed down the halls, he knew something was shifting, not just in the house, but inside himself and in her. The next morning broke warm and bright, the kind of spring light that seemed to hum with quiet promises. The storm had passed, and in its place came the gentle rhythm of wind through branches and the scent of earth finally breathing again. Ellie stood barefoot on the back porch, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the other clutching a small metal watering can. "Daddy," she called out. "Come look." Graham emerged from the side of the house, sleeves rolled up, smudged with dirt and the faint scent of pine. He followed her gaze. Beyond the porch, in a clearing framed by wild lilacs and broken fencing, stood the remains of an old tree, or what was left of one. A willow, long since hollowed by time, its trunk gray and sun-bleached branches severed by seasons of storms. But around its base, the soil had shifted, cracked open by recent rains, and within that wound, new shoots had started to sprout. Life. "Is that the tree Miss Annabelle used to sit under?" Ellie asked. Graham nodded slowly. "I think it is." From the open kitchen window, Annabelle heard them. She stepped outside, arms folded, loosely drawn by something in their voices. She stopped at the top step. "That tree was my favorite place in the world when I was a little girl," she said softly. My mom used to read to me beneath it. When I was scared or sick, that's where she'd take me. She said the willow knew how to listen. Graham turned. It's still listening. Annabelle walked down and approached the base of the tree, kneeling beside it. Her fingers brushed against the tender green shoots, fragile but determined. Something stirred in her, a flicker of something. Not quite memory, not quite longing. Ellie squatted beside her. Can we plant a new one? Like a baby willow. Annabelle looked at her, startled by the suggestion. You want to plant one? Ellie nodded with the solemnity only children can carry. We could help it grow. You and me. Graham, standing behind them, said nothing, but he didn't have to. He knew how powerful it was for Annabelle, for all of them to plant something that symbolized beginning again. Annabelle smiled. It was the first real one in days. Okay, she said. Let's do it. By noon, Graham had driven into town to pick up a young sapling from the local nursery. The owner, an elderly man, with dirt under his fingernails and eyes that had seen more seasons than most, helped Graham choose a healthy, resilient willow, its roots eager to take hold. Back at Willow Hill, Annabelle had unearthed a set of old gardening gloves and a weathered trowel. She wore jeans for the first time since their arrival, faded and familiar, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun that somehow made her look 10 years younger. Ellie danced around the spot they'd chosen for the new tree, placing smooth stones in a circle and humming to herself. It's like she's building a fairy ring, Annabelle mused, as Graham unloaded the sapling. She thinks trees grow better when you talk to them. Does she talk to all of them? Graham grinned. Just the ones she likes. Annabelle tilted her head. And this one, she likes this one a lot. They work together in quiet synchronicity, Graham digging the hole. Annabelle gently easing the roots into place, Ellie patting the soil with small, eager hands. I feel like this is something people should do more often, Annabelle said after a while. Plant trees. Plant hope. Graham looked at her, the sunlight catching the green flecks in her eyes. It's brave, he said. To plant something you might not live long enough to see at its fullest. Annabelle glanced down at the sapling, now standing upright in the earth, leaves trembling slightly in the breeze. Or maybe she said, it's enough just to know it started with you. That evening, the three of them sat on the back steps, watching the sun dip low across the hills. The sky was brushed in peach and gold, and the new willow stood like a quiet sentinel, marking something unseen but sacred. Do you think trees remember? Ellie asked. Remember what? Annabelle replied gently. Everything. Annabelle smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I think maybe they do. Silence settled in again, but it wasn't heavy. It was shared. After Ellie went to bed, Graham lingered by the fireplace, while Annabelle poured them both a cup of tea. She handed him a mug, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment neither of them moved. There's something about today, she said. I don't know what it is, but it feels like it meant something. It did, Graham said. You let yourself grow something again. Annabelle sat beside him, the fire casting soft shadows along the walls. I used to think my life would only start once I left this place behind. I spent years running from it. But now... She trailed off, staring into the flames. Graham waited. I think I'm finally starting to see that it's not the place I had to leave, she said. It was the hurt, the weight I carried inside it. And she looked at him. Maybe I don't have to carry it alone anymore. There it was, simple, quiet, raw. Not a declaration, not a plea. Just truth. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't move closer. He only nodded. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. Annabelle exhaled. It wasn't relief. It wasn't surrender. It was peace. Outside, the wind shifted. and the new willow, fragile and green, bowed gently in the evening air, as if acknowledging the change stirring deep in the roots of everything. Morning crept softly into the kitchen, not with grand beams of sunlight, but with a kind of humble warmth that seemed to rest in the corners, settle in the floorboards, and quietly exhale through the open window. The scent of lemon and soap lingered in the air, a testament to yesterday's efforts to healing through hands and motion. Annabelle stood at the counter, barefoot sleeves rolled a whisk in one hand and a worn recipe card in the other. She hadn't cooked in this kitchen since before her mother's health began to fail. For a long time, it had felt like crossing enemy lines, an emotional battleground, saturated with unmet expectations and quiet judgment. But today, she was making pancakes, and she didn't feel afraid. She heard the low murmur of Graham's voice in the hallway, likely encouraging Ellie to put on something besides her mismatched socks. The rhythm of their presence in the house had become natural, even comforting, like rain, tapping gently on a roof, steady and grounding. She flipped a pancake with surprising ease and smiled. By the time Graham and Ellie entered the kitchen, the table was set. Plates, forks, syrup, a bowl of berries. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. "Whoa," Graham said, eyebrows rising. "Did we wake up in someone else's house?" Annabelle gave him a mock glare. "Careful. I might actually make you do the dishes," Ellie gasped. "Miss Annabelle, these are real pancakes, I hope so," she said, laughing. "Otherwise, I've been flipping old floor mats." They sat down to eat together, sunlight warming the table, as the morning drifted on in that gentle, timeless way good mornings do. Later, after dishes were stacked, and Ellie retreated to the parlor with a puzzle Graham lingered behind, while Annabelle wiped down the counters. He leaned against the doorframe arms, crossed, watching her with something unreadable in his expression. What she asked, glancing up. "You're different today." Annabelle paused. "Is that bad?" He shook his head. "Not at all. Just lighter. Like something's shifted." She looked down at the sponge in her hand, then out the window, where the new willow swayed softly in the wind. "Maybe something has." Graham stepped forward, resting a hand on the edge of the counter. "You want to talk about it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she dried her hand slowly and leaned back against the sink, the air between them quiet, but thick with meaning. "There was a time I thought this house was a prison," she said finally, "full of echoes I didn't want to hear. My mother's disappointment, my own failures, all the things we never said." And now Annabelle met his eyes. Now I hear her laughter again, her humming in the hallway. I remember the smell of cinnamon when she baked, the way she tucked a curl behind my ear when I cried. It's not that the pain's gone, it's just not the only thing I feel anymore. Graham nodded slowly. "That's how you know healing started." She hesitated. "Do you ever wonder if you're allowed to heal? Like maybe you didn't earn it?" He exhaled the question, hitting closer than she probably knew. Every day, she waited, sensing more. "I had a brother," he said. "Kyle. Younger. Wild heart. Brilliant but reckless. He called me one night late. I was exhausted. I let it go to voicemail. Figured I'd call him in the morning." Annabelle's breath caught. By morning, Graham continued he was gone. Wrecked his truck on a mountain curve. They said he might have survived if help had come sooner. If I had answered. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Annabelle moved, slowly stepping close. Her fingers brushed his tentative but deliberate. "You didn't kill him, Graham." "I know," he said quietly. "But knowing and feeling are different things." She nodded, eyes shining. "Yes, they are." For a moment they stood there, connected by something deeper than shared space, something closer to shared wounds, finding air for the first time in years. Then Ellie's voice broke in from the parlor. "Daddy, I think I finished it." Graham smiled gently. "Duty calls." As he turned, Annabelle caught his hand for just a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said. He met her gaze. "For what?" "For not pretending you're okay. It helps more than you know." That afternoon, Annabelle found herself in her mother's sewing room, a space she'd ignored for years. Dust coated the windowsill, and bolts of fabric lined the walls, like a museum of half-finished intentions. She ran her hand along the edge of the desk, her fingers pausing over a small box marked "Repairs." Inside were pieces of things once torn or broken: a baby's bonnet, a torn apron, a man's shirt sleeve. Mended. Re-stitched. Not perfect, but loved enough to try. She closed the lid and whispered to the empty room, "I'm still trying. To Mom." That evening, Graham found her in the backyard, standing beneath the willow sapling. The sky was turning soft with dusk, and birds called lazily from the trees. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Annabelle gestured to the bench beside her. "It's technically your tree, too." He sat, stretching his legs. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Eventually, Annabelle tilted her head toward him. "You know I was planning to sell this place," I figured. I had all the documents ready. Legal counsel lined up. Everything. And now, she smiled faintly. "Now I think I want to see what it looks like after the dust settles." Graham looked out over the land, the old and new willows, standing side by side, like generations in quiet conversation. "I think it'll be beautiful," he said. Annabelle turned to him, eyes soft. "So do I." The rain returned in the early hours, soft as breath. It tapped at the windows like a polite visitor, not urgent, just present, like the memories that sometimes drifted in at dawn before one was fully awake. Annabelle stood barefoot in the hallway, wrapped in a robe, watching as droplets traced paths down the glass. For once, she didn't feel the need to retreat from the silence. She had dreamed of her mother, nothing elaborate, just a moment sitting beside her in the parlor, folding linen napkins, smiling. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a memory given back. Downstairs, she could already hear Ellie rustling around the kitchen, and Graham's voice, low, half laughing, half coaxing her not to feed toast to the cat. She let herself smile. A real one, the kind that came from the center of the chest, not just the corners of the mouth. The morning passed gently. Annabelle surprised herself by suggesting they decorate the parlor, a late nod to spring, maybe even Easter. She hadn't marked holidays in years, but something about the energy in the house made her want to acknowledge the turning of seasons again. Ellie dove into the idea with glee. Graham brought down boxes from the attic, some so dusty even the spiders had long abandoned them. They opened them together on the parlor floor, seated in a ring like a small accidental family. Inside, old lace runners, faded porcelain rabbits, velvet ribbons, and a cracked ceramic bowl once used for flower arrangements. Ellie lifted it like a sacred relic. "Is this treasure?" Annabelle smiled. "It was my mom's favorite. She used to fill it with white lilacs every April." "Can we do that?" Ellie asked. "Can we find some?" "Maybe tomorrow," Graham answered. "We'll make it a project." As they dug deeper, they found a tangle of string lights and battery-powered candles, most of which still worked. Graham unwound a strand and handed one end to Annabelle with a mock formality. "Shall we, Miss Whitmore?" She accepted it with a theatrical curtsy. "Lead on, Mr. Cole," Ellie clapped. "You two are funny together." Annabelle caught Graham's eye, and for a second, neither of them looked away. Then the moment broke, as moments do, into laughter and movement, and the quiet thrill of shared purpose. By afternoon, the parlor had transformed. Candles flickered on the windowsills. The hearth, long unused, now held a garland of pastel ribbon and dried flowers. Ellie had insisted on placing one of her drawings, a shaky but earnest sketch of the new willow, on the mantel. They stood back and admired their work. This doesn't feel like the same room, Graham said. It's not, Annabelle replied. None of them are. She looked around her gaze, pausing on the walls, the ceiling, the worn carpet she had once hated. Or maybe I'm the one who's different. Graham didn't respond with a compliment or reassurance. He simply nodded, as if to say, yes, you are. And it's beautiful. Later, while Graham fixed a loose railing on the back steps, Ellie tugged on Annabelle's hand. Miss Annabelle, she said, with the solemn tone of a royal decree, you need to learn how to play war. Annabelle raised an eyebrow. The card game. Yes, I'm very good at it. Daddy loses a lot. Is that so? She said, hiding her grin. Come on, Ellie insisted, already dragging her to the kitchen table. They shuffled the cards more or less and began playing. Ellie explained the rules with the exaggerated seriousness of a professor, occasionally making up a few new ones. You just drew a queen, and I drew a 6. That means I get your snacks, Ellie announced triumphantly. I don't have any snacks, Annabelle laughed. That's okay. You owe me cookies. Annabelle's shoulders shook with laughter, light ringing and entirely unfiltered. It filled the kitchen like a melody one Graham hadn't heard before. He stepped into the doorway, tool still in hand, and watched her. And for a moment he forgot about repairs, about the world outside, about the ticking clock of responsibilities. He just watched her laugh. It wasn't performative. It wasn't careful. It was hers. Alive. Bright. Unburdened. That evening, they ate together. Again. Roasted chicken salad from the garden. Graham helped her revive. And Ellie's awkward, but adorable lemonade surprise, made from a mix of lemons, honey, and a little love. Afterward, they moved to the parlor. The phonograph was playing softly a waltz her mother had adored. Annabelle sat by the window, the evening light gold across her features. I used to think love looked like candlelit dinners and passionate letters, she said quietly. But lately, it feels more like dishes done without asking. A light left on in the hallway. Pancakes in the morning. Graham looked over at her. Real love lives in the ordinary. She smiled. I think I'm finally learning that. Before bed, Ellie hugged Annabelle tightly. I hope you keep the house, she said. It needs you. Annabelle kissed the top of her head. Maybe I need it too. That night, while Graham cleaned up the last of the dishes, Annabelle stepped into the backyard. The sky was clear, scattered with stars. She stood beneath the willow, her hands in her coat pockets, head tilted to the sky. She heard him before she saw him. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I didn't want to. Not yet. They stood side by side in the soft dark. Today felt full, she said. He nodded. It was. Annabelle looked at him, then her voice steady. You've been here every day since the call, not just in this house. Here, present. I told you I fixed things. She smiled. Maybe. But I think you helped me remember how to feel them first. A pause. Graham, yeah, I laughed today. I know. It felt like flying. He looked at her, and in the hush of that moment he gently reached for her hand, not asking, not assuming, just offering. And this time she took it. The wind changed on a Thursday. It swept down from the hills with a crispness that hinted at seasons turning. The flowers that Ellie and Annabelle had planted along the walkway had begun to bloom their petals, trembling slightly under the shifting air. Even the trees seemed to lean differently, as if listening. Inside the house on Willow Hill felt warm, lived in. Dishes in the sink, a folded blanket left on the couch, Ellie's drawings taped proudly on the pantry door. But at the kitchen table, Graham sat with his coffee untouched and a piece of paper in his hands. Annabelle noticed immediately. You've gone still, she said, approaching quietly. He looked up, his face calm but unreadable. Just thinking. About what? He hesitated, then handed her the paper. It was a printed email, an offer from a nearby construction firm. Full-time position, competitive salary, year-long contract. Start date Monday. Annabelle looked up at him, her breath catching just slightly. This is good. It is, he said. A steady job, closer to Ellie's school, a little more structure than driving around fixing people's boilers on a prayer. She tried to smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. So you're taking it. I should, he replied. But do you want to? That made him pause. He looked out the window where Ellie was in the yard, gently brushing soil from a flower pot she insisted needed morning dusting. I don't know, he said honestly. It's the right thing. But lately, right and real feel like different directions. Annabelle sat down across from him, hands folded. Is this about me? She asked quietly. No, he said. But also, yes. It's about what this place has meant. What you've meant. She swallowed. And if you leave, he held her gaze, then I hope what we built here doesn't disappear with me. That afternoon, the mood in the house was tender in its quietness. They moved carefully around each other, Ellie oblivious to the undercurrent, playing with the cat, drawing more portraits of Miss Annabelle smiling. Graham packed lightly, just a backpack and a tool bag. He hadn't brought much in the first place. He hadn't expected to stay. Annabelle helped fold Ellie's clothes, pretending the routine steadied her hands. She didn't say, "Don't go." She didn't need to. When the sun began to dip, Graham stood on the front porch, the old screen door squeaking behind him. Ellie hugged him tight, her arms wrapped around his waist. "You'll visit?" she asked. "Always," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Besides, I still need to fix that flickering light in the upstairs hallway." Annabelle stood nearby, her arms crossed not in distance, but in defense. She nodded toward the gravel path. "I parked your truck by the barn," she said. "It starts better downhill." "Thank you," he said. They stood in silence. Finally, he took a step toward her. "I didn't come here planning to stay. I know. And I didn't plan to care this much. I know that too." "I'll call," he added. "I hope you do." Another beat passed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I didn't know what to say," he said. "So I wrote it." He pressed it into her hand. Then he turned, walked down the steps, got into the truck, and drove. Annabelle watched until the taillights disappeared into the trees. She stood there a while longer, the folded note trembling in her fingers. Back inside, Ellie sat on the floor, with her cat humming softly to herself. Annabelle leaned against the doorway, watching her, anchoring herself to the small, steady sounds of presence. Then finally, she opened the note. "Annabelle, some people walk into your life like storms and leave wreckage. You walked in like silence and stayed until I could hear again. You taught me that homes aren't places. They're people brave enough to stand still. Thank you for letting me stand still here." G. Her fingers closed around the note, not to crush it, to keep it close. That night, she sat alone in the parlor. No phonograph, no lights, just quiet. The kind that didn't ache but waited. She lit a candle, placed it on the mantel, and sat by the window, watching the breeze stir the curtains like breath. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply sat. And somewhere deep inside her, the earth shifted just a little, making room for something new. The days that followed unfolded gently, like a slowed heartbeat, like silence, learning how to breathe. Annabelle moved through the house with quieter steps, not because she was sad, but because she was listening. To herself, to the house, to the rhythms that had changed in Graham's absence and the ones that hadn't. She watered the flowers in the kitchen windowsill, sorted through her mother's recipe cards, and placed them in a new binder. She called the law office and postponed a decision on the estate. Not forever, just long enough to decide from a place of clarity, not defense. And every evening when the sun dipped behind the hills, she lit the candle on the mantel, not as a vigil, but as a welcome. Ellie had left behind a few of her drawings. Annabelle taped one to the fridge, a picture of 3 stick figures standing under a willow tree, each holding a balloon with a smiley face. She missed them, more than she expected. But it wasn't the kind of missing that hollowed her. It was a kind that reminded her how full life had briefly been and how full it could be again. 3 days passed. On the 4th evening, just after twilight fell, a truck pulled into the drive. No headlights, no announcement. Just the slow crunch of gravel, familiar and steady. Annabelle stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, and froze. The engine stopped. A door creaked open. She wiped her hands and walked to the front door, her heart thudding with something that wasn't panic or longing, but recognition. When she opened it, Graham was standing at the bottom of the steps, backpack slung over one shoulder, tool bag in hand. He looked tired, windswept, like a man who'd driven farther than the mileage could explain. "I forgot to fix the hallway light," he said. Annabelle stared at him, expression unreadable. "You drove all this way? For a light bulb?" He smiled faintly. "I drove back to see if what I left was still here." "And what was that?" "Exactly." Graham looked at her without flinching. A beginning. She stepped down one stair, then another, and stopped when she was close enough to see the dust on his boots and the hesitation in his eyes. "You didn't have to come back," she said, her voice quiet. "I know. You didn't promise me anything. I didn't want to. Why? Because I wanted the decision to be real." Annabelle studied him for a moment, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan. "And is it?" she asked. He nodded. "I had a choice," he said. "A good job. A safer path. But I realized something. Ellie and I don't need perfect. We just need honest, present, kind. And this house, you, what we found here, it's more real than anything I've known in a long time." The wind stirred between them, brushing her hair across her cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, not in desperation, but in welcome. His bag dropped to the ground, and for a long time, neither moved. Later that night, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter. Annabelle had pulled out her mother's old skillet, and Graham sliced apples, while Ellie stirred batter with an exaggerated seriousness. It wasn't a holiday, wasn't an occasion, but it felt like one. They laughed. They spilled flour. Ellie demanded everyone wear aprons, Annabelle in her mother's, Graham in one with ducks on it, and Ellie in a makeshift towel tucked into her shirt. The apple fritters were imperfect. Some were too crisp, others lumpy. But when they sat at the kitchen table eating by candlelight and laughter, it felt sacred. Not because of the food, because of the ordinary. Because they were there. Later, as Ellie fell asleep on the couch, mid-story, Annabelle and Graham sat on the porch, 2 mugs of tea warming their hands. The willow tree swayed softly in the distance, its branches newly green. "You really came back," she said, almost to herself. "I couldn't stay away. You still have time to change your mind." "I won't." She sipped her tea, the steam curling in the cool air. "I don't need you to fix everything you know," she said. "Not this house. Not me. I know, but I want you here." He looked at her. "Good. Because I didn't come back to rescue anyone." Annabelle turned to him, her voice low. "Then why did you come?" He reached over and gently took her hand. To stay. Spring arrived without fanfare. It didn't burst into bloom or sing in bird calls. It simply settled in, like someone returning home without needing to knock. The fields around Willow Hill turned lush and forgiving. The orchard, once brittle and silent, whispered in soft greens. And beneath the new willow shoots grew taller by the day, each leaf a quiet declaration we begin again. Graham had stayed, not just in presence, but in rhythm. He repaired the roof over the west porch, built Ellie a tree swing in the old oak behind the barn, and spent his mornings tending a vegetable patch that Annabelle half-joked he was cultivating more tenderly than any relationship. Annabelle didn't mind. She cooked again, hummed again. She wrote letters to people she hadn't spoken to in years, some to forgive, some to thank. And in the evenings, she sat by the fire with a notebook open in her lap, scribbling plans for turning the estate's west wing into a community reading room. The house, once quiet in grief, now echoed with life, not loud, but full, and that she realized was enough. The day they opened the gate was the first Saturday in May. A small sign was posted at the road, "Open House Books, Coffee Friendship," and underneath Ellie had written, in thick marker, "Bring your smile." The first to arrive was Mrs. Carter, the retired teacher who'd taught Annabelle to read. Then came the Millers, with homemade blueberry muffins, and Reverend Sanders, with a stack of books he insisted someone had to finally enjoy. Neighbors wandered in with curiosity and left with comfort. No one asked why Annabelle had invited them. They just stayed longer than they planned. That afternoon, Graham found Annabelle beneath the willow. She was sitting cross-legged, her dress bunched around her ankles, watching as Ellie read a picture book aloud to 2 toddlers on a picnic blanket. "She's found her place," he said, settling beside her. Annabelle nodded. She never had to look far. They sat in the filtered light dappled through the green canopy above. "Do you remember the first time you stood here?" he asked. She smiled. "I remember not knowing if I belonged." And now she turned to him, her voice low but sure. "Now I know I do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, folded fabric frayed at the edges. It was her mother's apron, stitched by hand. The threads faded, but still strong. "I found it in the repair box," he said. "Thought maybe it deserved to stay out again." Annabelle took it gently, fingers brushing the seams. "She'd like that," she said. She always said mending things was an act of love. She was right. A breeze swept through the clearing, and above them, the young willow bent ever so slightly, as if nodding in agreement. That evening, the last guests lingered by the gate as the sun dipped behind the hills. The sky turned golden, then lavender. The house, with its windows lit and doors wide open, looked like it had always been waiting for this kind of day. Inside, Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch, a flower crown slipping down her forehead. Graham covered her with a blanket, while Annabelle blew out the last of the candles. In the quiet that followed, they stood together by the kitchen window, watching the shadows grow long across the grass. "I used to think life happened somewhere else," Annabelle said. "In some other city, some other version of me. And now I think life happens in small places," she whispered. "In pancakes and porch lights, in second chances and ordinary love." Graham took her hand. "In homes that let us become who we were always meant to be." She turned to him, eyes full, not of tears, but of presence. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For staying, for not rushing, for letting this be real." He touched her cheek gently. "You saved yourself, Annabelle. I was just lucky enough to witness it." She leaned into him, and they stood in stillness, not as people who needed each other to be whole, but as people who had chosen to walk forward together. Outside under the stars, the house on Willow Hill glowed from within lamplight. In the windows, laughter still lingering in the walls. And beneath the willow, the young tree swayed in the night air. It wasn't yet tall. Its roots were still learning the earth. But it was growing. And so were they. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. It's always moving to see how stories like this find their way into living rooms, kitchens, and quiet corners across the globe. And if you'd like more stories like this, gentle, real, and full of hope, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to share the next one with you. Thank you truly for spending your time here. In a world that moves fast, it means everything that you chose to pause and listen. Until next time, stay well and take care of your heart.